may be seated.
Let's check outside. If there's any news media, I would like them to come in, please, for me to address the collective body of the news media. Got everybody in? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you are here to do your job, and I do not want to interfere with your job, but neither do I want your coverage of this case to interfere with the fair trial and due process that's involved necessarily for both the defendant in this case as well as the state. One of the things that the Supreme Court has given me the right to do is to exclude all news coverage in the way of video or still photography if it becomes distracted, or it becomes a distraction, or becomes disruptive. So while you may be here, if you have filed the proper notice and been allowed to have a still camera such as that you have on that tripod, you may do so, but you cannot move that camera to a different location during the time. And if that shutter clicking becomes a distraction for the jury, then I'm going to have to ask you to stop that. I don't have any problem with you doing your job, but if it comes to the point where it becomes a distraction. Furthermore, I would just like to point out that while you have every right to photograph people in a public place, I would ask that you show some respect both for the defendant and the counsel on that side, and also for the family of Mr. Baker who are here, and they're not here to be necessarily photographed or videotaped. They're here to see the outcome of this case. So just be respectful, if you will. So what I'm asking you to do is to cooperate. I'm not going to interfere with what you have to do, but neither do I want you're doing your job to interfere with what we have to do. Does everybody understand that? I appreciate your concern and your cooperation. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll deal with it if it becomes a distraction. So now we are ready. Thank you. That's all I needed to say. If we could bring the defendant in. Before we bring the jury in, I want to also address I think that there's been a
recording in progress.
There's been a question about whether or not the charge has been. Any of you have any special requests on the final instructions? And I think what we've done is we've got the checklist out of the Tennessee pattern instructions for criminal cases to give both sides for you to check to see if there's any additional issues that you want to address in the final charge. So please look at those specifically. If there's any question about a facilitation charge or an attempt charge, we need to deal with that on the record. All right. Anything then before we begin and bring the jury in? All right. We're ready for the jury. I want to address a couple of things with them because I allowed the curriculum body to be introduced to the last two witnesses after they had left the room, and I want to do it on the record, make sure they understand, because some of those folks are keeping up with a number of exhibits. I don't want to mess with that. So. All right, good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here and cooperating with us. Wanted to clarify on the record a couple of things. When I said yesterday that we had a few more steps to go, I wanted to explain to you on the record that what I was referring to in that regard was simply that whenever we get to the state's proof closing, meaning that the state will rest, then the defense will have an opportunity to present any proof they want to on the guilt or innocence phase. They are not required to do so. I would remind you that the law presumes Mr. Wiggins to be innocent. The burden of proof on that issue is always with the state, so they're not required to put on any proof. That'll be their decision to make. But if they do not choose to put on any proof, then we'll move to the sentencing phase. And not the sentencing phase, we'll move to the phase where you will be considering the closing arguments of the counsel and as well as my final instructions. And then at that point, we will allow you to start deliberating on those issues. So the steps that I was referring to in that regard had to do with those matters. So please understand that. Also wanted to clarify that there are two expert witnesses that testified late yesterday afternoon. One of them was Kyle Osborne, the other one was Shelley Harmon. After I had dismissed you from the room, we allowed the state to introduce the curricula vitae, which is basically the qualifications of those experts, as exhibits. So for those of you who are keeping up with the exhibits, Exhibit 199 will be the curricula vitae of Kyle Osborne, and Exhibit 200 will be the curricula vitae for Shelley Harmon. So, Carmen? All right, Shelley Carmen. All right, so we have those two additional exhibits, and that will bring you up to date. Everybody got that? All right, sure. Exhibit 199 is the curricula vitae for Kyle Osborne, who is with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And then Exhibit 200 was the curricula vitae for Shelley Carmen, who is also with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. All right? All right. Then we are now ready to begin the state's proof again. You may call your first witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Edmund Hadley.
Doctor, if you'll come forward, please, and raise your right hand and let our clerk please show the oath.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Hadley.
Good morning.
Could you please say your full name and spell your last name for the court?
Yes, it's Edmund Dabney Hadley III, and it's Hadley.
Okay. And Dr. Hadley, if we could please, could we go over a little bit of your educational background?
Sure. I have a Bachelor's of Science degree from Austin P. I then subsequently went to medical school at Wake Forest. I did emergency medicine training for 3 years at Vanderbilt.
Okay.
Following that,
And what kind of degrees do you have then?
I have a doctorate of medicine. After my Bachelor's of Science.
Okay. And are you board certified in anything?
I'm board certified in emergency medicine.
Your Honor, if I could approach the witness.
You may.
And Dr. Hadley, do you recognize the document that I've handed you?
Yes, this is my CV.
Okay. And does that go over the qualifications and your educational background?
Yes, it does.
And is it current and accurate?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would move Dr. Hadley's CV as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 201.
Now, Dr. Hadley, could you discuss a little bit more about what board certification in emergency medicine is?
Sure. So to be board eligible, you have to complete a residency program after medical school. So that's either 3 or 4 years, depending on that program. Then there's a written exam followed by an oral board exam. And if you pass all those qualifications, you can become board certified.
Okay. And how many years does this endeavor take to become board certified?
So following your 4 years of medical school, there's those 3 or 4 years of residency training, and then the testing an oral exam for the next 1 to 2 years following that.
And is this more training in this specific field than other medical doctors would necessarily have?
It is specific to emergency medicine only. So we are, as a cardiologist would do something in their field, we have specific training just to work in the emergency room and become board certified in emergency medicine.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender Dr. Hadley as an expert in emergency medicine.
Okay. All right, he will be qualified as an expert in the field of emergency medicine.
Dr. Hadley, I'm going to hand you a document.
All right.
Before we start talking about that, let's talk about your employment.
Okay.
As a doctor, where have you been employed?
So when I finished my residency in 2015, I started at a private group. I work at Sumner Regional Medical Center in Gallatin, Tennessee. I am a partner there. I've been there ever since. I also am a vice president of a chain of urgent cares based out of the Nashville area and a co-owner in that. And then I guess for this case, I had also picked up shifts. They call it locum tenens, just as needed to work at Horizon.
Okay. And you said at Horizon. Could you explain where Horizon is?
So Horizon is in Dixon, Tennessee. They have 2 locations. One is a freestanding ER just by itself. One is at a hospital, attached with all the other services.
Okay. And in this case, were you working at Horizon in the freestanding emergency
Yes, ma'am.
care on June the 1st, 2018?
Yes, ma'am.
And I've handed you some documentation. Could you briefly look at that and tell me if you recognize that?
Yes, so this is my medical record from that day.
Okay. And Your Honor, that is a certified copy that the state will be admitting into evidence, but we'd like Dr. Hadley to be able to read that while we're there. So we would like to move this record in as the next exhibit.
Any objection? All right, we'll move this as Exhibit 202. You want to have it marked and then return to the witness?
Yes, please.
All right.
Now, Dr. Hadley, up on the screen here, is that an accurate representation of the medical records that you're holding?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And if you would, please, could you explain who the name of the patient is?
So it is Stephen Joshua Wiggins.
Okay. And is there an admission date?
It's 6/1/2018.
And is there a time there?
7:58 a.m.
And Doctor, could you briefly explain sort of the medical documentation procedure when somebody comes into the ER? Like what kind of records are kept?
Sure. So they are all electronic records. When you come in, I guess the first step is getting all the pertinent logistics, name, date of birth, time. Most of this is done by staff, whether they come in, through the front desk or by an ambulance. And then subsequently, my record will kind of later on after all this initial logistics were entered in.
Now, Doctor, when somebody presents themselves to this ER, you said, are you supervising the nursing staff? Who has the main contact with the patient?
So it's kind of both. First typically the nurse will do an initial assessment and a triage and get vital signs, chief complaint reasons why patients are there, initial assessment, and then subsequently, it's my job to kind of assess the situation, take that information in order, test as deemed appropriate.
Okay. So in essence, are you supervising the medical care of a patient that comes in?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you also make your own record of the supervision of this patient?
Yes, it should be in this chart.
All right. If you could scroll down, scroll down a little bit. Do you see there's a primary code set listed up there, Doctor, under the diagnosis?
Yes.
Does that mean anything to you there?
That is just the kind of discharge diagnoses, so that is used typically for billing insurance.
Okay. But it's further explained later down in the medical records there. right?
Correct.
All right. If you could please scroll down to the next page. And Doctor, are these all of the conditions of admission that a patient signs before they're allowed to consent to treatment.
Yes, this will be the consent to treatment. I'm sure there's some billing agreements among other things.
Okay. And Mr. Etheridge, if you could scroll down to where the Horizon medical records start, I believe it's at least after page 10. Okay. And right here, doctor, is this the patient's information?
Yes, this would be their kind of logistics, their address, contact information
Okay.
sheet.
If you could scroll to the next page, please. And is that more of the same information?
It is.
And the next page, please. All right. And doctor, this page, does this start your report?
This would start my report.
Okay. If you would, please, could you walk us through your report and discuss how Mr. Wiggins presented himself, what his issues were, and walk down through his medical treatment?
Sure. So the first line there would be when I saw him or initially went into the room. That'd be at 8:06 a.m. With the chief complaint of weakness, just diffuse weakness, body aches. The next is my note of what happened. Some of this is computer-based, but also what I have added in. So he presented initially with generalized weakness and fatigue. He had been out on the run from law enforcement since Wednesday morning. He was complaining of severe fatigue and generalized, non-localized myalgias, or just body aches and pains. It did not radiate, so that means the pain was not moving to one specific location. Nothing seemed to make it better at that time. He didn't have any apparent trauma, no focal or localizing injuries. He did have complaint of some vomiting and some left hand pain, no diarrhea, and he was complaining of being hungry.
So that was his initial complaint, and then you will address that medically, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if you could, what is the review of systems?
So a review of systems is where we document that we walk through. There's a number of questions I will typically ask a patient. And this just sort of is the summary of them, that they were all negative, such as, yes, do you have chest pain? Do you have belly pain? Do you have headaches? And it all is kind of pertinent to the exact patient at that time, but everything not documented in that first section would have had answers that we said were addressed as no.
Okay. And the past medical history, do you get that from the patient?
The past medical history is based on what the patient has stated to us in terms of what are your prior medical problems.
So what did he tell you that the prior medical problems were?
That he had a history of intermittent low blood sugars. I believe he also had reported a history of seizure disorder and transient ischemic attacks to the nursing staff as well.
And can you just briefly talk about what a transient ischemic attack is?
So that's also known as a mini stroke, if you may have heard it, but it's stroke-like symptoms in the past that had completely resolved. Typically the definition is they're gone within 24 hours. They don't have any sort of lasting effects.
Okay. And the reported medication that was there?
So he had an allergy to erythromycin and reported home medications of Keppra and Tegretol.
Could you go to the next page, please? And at the top of that, there's a review of nursing notes for the past medical history. Could you just go over that again, please?
Yeah, so nursing makes their own full and complete assessment, and so that's just documenting that I had reviewed what was available at that time and agreed with what they had also documented.
And did they document any notes about medication?
They did note that he did not take his seizure medicines. He self-reported that he was not taking his home seizure medicines.
Okay. And could you explain, too, under additional medical history, what a pylongeal abscess is?
So a pilonidal abscess is just basically a boil that usually occurs on the buttocks that has previously been drained. It would be kind of an isolated event.
But that's nothing that he was getting treated for.
Correct.
And then can we go down to the, he says that there's no additional surgical history So he didn't report any surgical?
No surgical history was reported.
Okay. And could you explain what the physical exam is, the first and last documented?
Sure. So the physical exam is just, how when a physician listens to your heart, kind of assesses you, any injuries you may have, all those typical things. The first document is the vital signs. I believe that's the first set of vital signs upon arrival. And then the last documented, those will also be continuously checked throughout the stay.
And when he first arrived, were his vital signs within the normal range?
Yes, his temperature was slightly low at 96.2. Otherwise, heart rate 105, the normal is 100, so very slightly what we call tachycardic or fast. Other than that, they look really pretty good.
Okay. And on his last documented, which appears to be at about 2:30 in the afternoon?
Yes, his temperature had improved at that point. His heart rate was still slightly fast, nothing that was remarkable, but slightly above the normal limits.
Okay, thank you. And you just basically talked about the physical exam. Could you please explain your notes there?
Sure. So, we go typically head to toe, and so my exam, I can walk you through that, but, no obvious trauma to the head. We check the pupils. Are they equal and reactive to light? Are they clear? Are there any kind of, focal injuries to the eyes? Those all looked okay. His mucous membranes were moist. That's just a sign of how bad dehydration can be. His neck was supple, not rigid. Abdomen was soft and non-tender. He did have wet clothing on, and he was somewhat tremulous upon arrival.
And doctor, could you explain what tremulous on arrival would be?
Yeah, so he was just having some kind of shaking, mild kind of tremors with his body, likely in response to that low temperature.
Okay. And then down at the focus PE?
Yes, so, this is kind of just further expounding on that exam that we did, but he was awake and alert. In terms of his respiratory or heart and lung exams, there was no obvious signs of trauma. His breath sounds were normal and clear. He was in no respiratory distress. Again, his heart rate was normal. It was in a regular rhythm. There were no murmurs noted. In terms of skin, he did have a diffuse, so what I call a macular blanching rash, but that's just a mild kind of red rash that goes away when you push on the rash. Is just a way that we assess what that rash might be to the torso, so to his chest and back. No erythema, which is just a different type of rash that would suggest infection in there. No induration or drainage. Those are other just signs and words we look for infection when there's a rash present. Neurologically, he was awake. He was oriented ×3, so that's to person, place, and time. He knew where he was. His speech was normal without slurring. And he didn't have any motor deficits. In other words, his extremities all move equally without any areas of focal weakness. And then psychiatrically, he was tearful, that I documented, but his thought content was normal, meaning he was able to follow the conversation appropriately. It wasn't nonsensical speech, and he had no apparent psychosis in that interaction.
Now, doctor, let's talk a little bit about that. Is that something that's important when you come in for the emergency room? Do you see people with apparent psychosis?
Yes, so the emergency room, for better or worse, is the place where the majority of acutely psychotic people who need acute psychiatric care are presented until they can get to a facility with a psychiatrist. So I'm certainly no psychiatrist, but my job is also make sure that people do not need emergency. I have the right as an emergency medicine doctor to sign what we call an involuntary commitment, or take somebody's rights away if they are acutely psychotic and have them placed in a psychiatric hospital. And this is simply stating that there were no signs of that. I cannot speak to long-term psychiatric diagnoses or things of that nature, but in the acute setting, I did not notice any of those things.
All right, thank you, doctor. And then below that are interpretations of lab results. Could you explain both? These graphs and charts are a little bit confusing to those of us that don't look at it normally. Could you just basically explain what it means?
Sure, and those charts are kind of just a graphic representation of these numbers in the boxes that are below and on the next page. The one on the left-hand side is going to be your blood cell counts, so white blood cell counts are on the far left-hand side. The middle is your red blood cell counts in two different ways that they're documented. And then the right-hand column of that first is your platelet counts. The next graph over on the right-hand side is going to be all your electrolytes. So that's things like your sodium, your potassium, your glucose, your chloride.
Was there anything abnormal or noteworthy about these numbers?
Yes, and I'll document this later on as well, but his white blood cell count was fairly significantly elevated initially. That is that bottom marked 814 on the left-hand side, 28.8. Because it was elevated, we did recheck it later on, and that's that top number of 17.7. So it had decreased almost in half by the time we rechecked it just a couple hours later.
When he was discharged, was it within a normal dischargeable range?
Yes.
Okay.
It was.
So all of these numbers down at the bottom, I'm not going to make you go through all of that, but is that all the blood work, specific blood work?
So that is just more blood work. This is kind of the charting test with it spelled out of these same numbers, just in chart form.
Okay. If you could scroll down a little bit, please, Mr. Etheridge, to, I believe, page, the next page. On here on the chemistry, doctor,
Yes.
do you see a glucose level?
So there's a glucose of 95 that was in those labs at 814.
Okay. And is that in the normal range?
That's normal.
Okay. Thank you. If we could go over, I believe, to page 6 of 9. Page 6 of 9, so the next page. Up at the top, thank you. And doctor, at the top there, is that just more continuation of the blood work and the chart?
Yes, that's just documentation of more blood work sent.
And then can you explain the impressions in radiology?
Yes, so he had complained of left hand pain, and though my exam was normal, didn't see any obvious deformity, breaks, injuries. We took an x-ray to be sure that there was not something subtle. No fractures were noted by that. He did have a cystic lesion in the scaphoid, which is a bone in the wrist, that the radiologist documented as most likely a benign subchondral cyst, which is just a area of thick bone growth that many people have incidentally found on x-rays. But no fractures or obvious injuries were noted.
Was that an acute injury that the patient was complaining of when he came in?
Yes.
Okay. If you could scroll down, please, a little bit further. What is the reevaluation in MDM?
So reevaluation in MDM is where I make the majority of my notes of what happened. So MDM stands for medical decision making, and it's just kind of a fluid text box that we fill out documenting our thought process, why we order tests and treatments that we do.
Okay, and if you could just explain that.
Sure. You want me to read through this, or?
That would be the easiest way for you, doctor.
Okay. So patient arrived in custody for medical screening. Initially, he was mildly tachycardic or had a fast heart rate, tremulous in wet clothing. He had very mild hypothermia, temperature that we had talked about, but he was otherwise stable. He had normal thought content, but intermittently seemed tearful. And then this kind of goes into what we started next. So that was my kind of initial assessment. IV fluid bolus was initiated, so that's just saline in your IV. We warmed him with a bear hugger, which is basically just warm air circulated through a plastic sheet. It's more efficient at warming someone than just warm blankets, just to speed up that process. He was given food. Labs were sent in that initial, so leukocytosis was that white blood cell count of 28,000. And I get into my decision making. I said that I suspect this is from an acute stress response given the recent events and exposures. There are no signs of acute infectious source that would be suggestive of sepsis. So when we see an elevated white blood cell count, we have to think, what is this from? And the number one thing we think about is infection, but it is also seen with stress, dehydration, bad traumas. And so that was just me documenting that I thought this was not an infection that was causing this, but more a stress response. Labs also show a CK of 5,000, suggesting very early rhabdo. And so rhabdomyolysis is the medical name for muscle breakdown, and the CK is the lab that checks for that. That is pretty mild, so dangerous levels would be 50,000. His was 5,000, but it's enough for us to think we need to do something about this and treat it. The treatment is typically rest and IV fluids, which is just me kind of explaining here, and I said it should clear with IV fluid and warming.
And doctor, I'm going to stop you and ask you specifically about that term. Could you explain a little bit more about what that condition is of rhabdomyolysis?
Yeah, so rhabdomyolysis is, as I was saying, kind of just unnatural or more than normal muscle breakdown. The most common place that we see that is actually in people who work out for the first time in a while and they overdo it, and then their body starts this process of breaking down all that muscle more than it normally would. It also can be seen though in situations, and in this situation I was concerned it was just from being out for a couple days, not having much to eat or drink, being dehydrated, and probably being awake and walking more than typical. The reason we worry about that is because that muscle breakdown products can actually harm your kidneys if you're not aggressive and treat it with IV fluid and get it to clear.
But in this case, you all did treat it with IV fluid to get.
That's correct. And we rechecked that lab later on. I think this will speak to it, and it was going back down in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. If you could just continue on, doctor.
So CR, which stands for creatinine, was slightly elevated from baseline, but not significantly so. That's just touching to that muscle breakdown, and if it's harming his kidneys or not. Creatinine is the kidney function. Bicarb decreased slightly as well. That's another one of those electrolytes. LFTs, which are liver function tests, also slightly elevated from most recent levels, so comparing back to prior labs that would have been in the medical record, which I suspect is from recent days' events. / dehydration. So this is all just speaking to kind of the overall picture that I and my medical record are trying to present, that he was exposed to the elements, was cold, was dehydrated, and what we're going to do to kind of correct those things. I then say blood cultures and lactic acid were added as he met protocol for sepsis workup, and Rocephin given, so that anytime you have a high white blood cell count, as we were saying, you worry about infection, there are hospital protocols in place. So we sent blood cultures to look for bacteria or infection in his blood just because of that elevated lab. And then lactic acid is a lab that looks for signs of severe illness that might be caused by infection. Rocephin is an antibiotic that just covers any possible bacteria that would be growing there when you start that protocol. I then say, however, my suspicion for sepsis is very low at this time, and I do suspect clinical findings are related to the recent environmental exposures. The lactic acid returned normal. His temperature normalized, and our active warming, as we mentioned, was stopped. His heart rate was waxing and waning from normal to slight tachycardia, and his tremor that was initially present had resolved. And so these are just, as the day progressed, my notes and reassessments were made, and kind of as things improved, me just documenting that. And then I said we'll recheck labs at 12:30, so a couple hours thereafter the initial labs were drawn. I then go on, say, repeat lab work shows dramatic improvement. White blood cell count was trending down. That CK for muscle breakdown lab was trending down significantly, and the electrolyte abnormalities were improving. Then later on, he continued to have mild tachycardia. I did give, so we'll give D5 with 3 amps of bicarb. So that's just a different type of IV fluid that will help to clear those muscle breakdown products for rhabdo or muscle breakdown, and for mild bicarb deficit. So that's just, instead of our normal saline, which probably if you see these hydration clinics or anything is typically used, we just switch to a different fluid to kind of help speed up the correction of some of those abnormalities. Then I said patient was awake and alert. Initially was confused while drowsy, but quickly became alert and appropriate. So just talking to initially on intermittently had some confusion, but now was completely awake and alert. And I do feel that his fatigue is related to recent events / catecholamine surge with subsequent crash. So catecholamines are just your adrenaline, and when you have a big event and you're kind of in a stressful event, you get a surge of that adrenaline, and then afterwards a lot of people feel very fatigued as all that kind of goes away. And then later on, I just say he continues to improve. He has been ambulatory, so he's been able to walk around the emergency room. He's taken multiple meals by mouth, and he's tolerating PO or by mouth well, so he's tolerating those meals well. His tachycardia, that fast heart rate, is improving as well. And I said, but I suspect it will persist for the next several days. So, given the dehydration, I thought some of that would probably take a couple of days to completely normalize. He understands that he was dehydrated, so that's just documenting my conversations with him and his need to continue to drink IV fluids, or to drink fluids orally. And he is stable for discharge from the emergency room, and he was in police custody at that time.
Okay, and if you could go down and talk about the medication that you had ordered.
Sure. So the ceftriaxone is that antibiotic. We discussed that was just per the sepsis protocol because of the elevated white blood cell counts. He did, for some of his body aches, he did get a dose of Tylenol there, that next acetaminophen. He was having those tremors we talked about, which I did feel like were likely because of cold, but at some point we did give him levetiracetam or Keppra. That's a seizure medicine, just to be extra safe. That was his home medicine he was supposed to be on. He hadn't been on for a while, so you can never be too safe. I'd rather err on the side of caution, so he received a dose of that in his IV.
Now, doctor, I'm going to stop you. Is
Yes.
that all of the pain management medication that he received? In his
Yes,
treatment?
it is.
So he received no narcotics from the hospital?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you continue to the electrolyte?
Yes, and then this last column is all the different fluids that he received. So they just describe kind of different types of IV fluids in that whole column, and there's a whole list of them there.
Okay. And if we go to the next page, please. And doctor, could you describe that?
Yes, and we updated his tetanus vaccine while he was there.
And then the discharge and departure. Could you explain that information, please?
Sure. So this just documents, and I believe they were the same ones as earlier, but his first documented vital signs when he came in, followed by the ones right before he left. His condition was documented as improved, so he just saying all his symptoms and his lab findings were improved from his initial arrival. And then you have my diagnosis here, which primarily was dehydration. The secondary diagnoses were exertional rhabdomyolysis, or that muscle breakdown, hypothermia associated with environmental changes, so just low body temperature because being exposed to outside conditions and being wet, and then general weakness.
Okay, thank you. And the next page, doctor, I think that's the final one of your report. And that's where you just...
And this is just kind of saying that I've spoken with the patient and her caregivers. I explained all these findings with them, and they've expressed understanding of those things.
Okay, thank you. And that's the end of your record per se for this, but not the entire medical record, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. If you go to the next page, please, and we'll have you kind of explain what this is and how you may use it. Do you recognize what this chart is?
So this would be the kind of nursing records primarily of the same visit.
Okay. And could you explain a little bit about what a nursing record is?
So the nursing's job is kind of to, I guess you would say, they want to report everything. So they report the patient's conditions, their symptoms, their physical exam findings, when and how they administered any medications or fluids. And this is really a more extensive record almost. And then my note is kind of consolidating that into what I feel like are the important points for actual medical care.
Is this information that you do consider when you're making your diagnosis and treatment?
Yes, it
prognosis?
is.
Okay. And doctor, if you could read over on under the assessments column on the left-hand side, under the hyperglycemia,
Yes.
is there could you explain what was reported in there?
So it says stated high/low blood sugar and weak.
And was there was the individual alert or conscious? Was a loss of consciousness? And what was the blood sugar value?
Yes, they were alert. It says loss of consciousness, yes, reported by patient. And I don't believe that I spoke with him specifically about that or no more details, but it says current finger stick. Blood sugar value is 80, which would be within the normal limits.
Okay. And on the right-hand column, doctor, at the top, under the rapid initial assessment, could you go over the subjective assessment and objective assessment?
Yes, so subjective assessment would be what the patient tells the nurse upon arrival, kind of that initial complaint, and it says complains of low blood sugar and generalized body pain. The objective assessment is that first assessment the nurse sees on arrival. It says pruny hands and feet, generalized head to toe raised rash, minor abrasions on arms and legs, no noted bruising, mud, dirt, debris, head to toe, skin, and clothing/shoes.
Okay. Thank you. And if we could go to page 8 of this document. All right. Now, doctor, on page 8, it has another different column down at the bottom which says emergency notes, and I think that is just a reassessment of the finger stick and the complaint. And then over on the right-hand side,
Yes.
the fourth one down occurring at 9 o'clock, starting with the second IV abscess. Could you describe that note?
Yes, so it's they put in a second IV just with the amount of fluid that we were giving to help speed that process up. It was a 20 gauge, that's what size of the needle in the left upper arm. It says patient refused to answer nurse questions and then began shaking in the bed with seizure-like movements. Doctor made aware, meaning they came and told me. Patient then began speaking to us and apologizing. I'm sorry. Keppra started per my MD order for seizure history. Patient then giving a sandwich, chips, fruit cup, and drink. He ate about 85% of the meal. Patient somnolent, bear hugger turned off, that's that warmer. Patient temperature 97.8 and skin drying.
Okay. And that was about 9 o'clock in the morning. There's an occurred column and a recorded column. So the occurred column would be when it actually happened. So that's approximately an hour afterwards. He was already getting better and being fed.
Right.
Okay. On the next page, please. And doctor, there's some notes on this. About the third one down at about 12:55. Could you read that one, please?
Vital signs reassessed at this time. Patient following all commands appropriately. No distress noted. Law enforcement en room.
Okay. And the next one at 14:10. I guess it's skipping one.
Non-slip socks placed on patient prior to walking. Patient was able to get up out of the bed and walk greater than 16 feet with minimal standby assistance.
Okay. And the last note on there at 1444.
Doctor in room with patient explaining discharge diagnosis. Patient states understanding and repeated instructions for clarity. Bilateral IVs discontinued. Coban and 2x2s placed. IV catheter intact. No redness at sites noted.
Okay. So is that basically the end note for his well-being before discharge?
Right. So that would be when I spoke with them to go over those notes kind of as we discussed, and then following that, the nurse would take out those IVs, place the bandages on them, and make sure that he was ready to be discharged from medical care.
Okay, thank you. And if you could flip through the rest of those records, I think, Doctor, they are lab orders and orders for you to have given IV fluids on time. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, it's just more documentation of those orders and lab results.
Okay. And then at the end, is there a patient-signed acknowledgement that he understands what his conditions were, dehydration and rhabdomyolysis?
There is.
We'll pass the minutes, Your Honor. And to be clear, the medical records were already marked in as an
They
exhibit.
were marked as Exhibit 202.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Evans, you have questions?
Yes, Your Honor. Morning, Doctor. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing well. My name's Luke Evans. I'm just going to have a few questions for you to
Sure.
go back over some of the things you discussed with the state. So, I believe it was on page is this? 8 of the record that discussed the nurse's notes about Mr. Wiggins began shaking in the bed with seizure-like movements.
Yes, sir.
And then under that, it says Keppra started per MD order for seizure history. And are you the MD they're referring to?
Yes, sir.
And what is Keppra specifically?
Keppra is an anti-epileptic or seizure medicine.
Okay. And when you say Keppra started, does that mean it was given to him through his IV?
That's correct.
Now, you made the reference, I think, when his discharge note that when he discharged, he was stable.
That's correct.
Does that mean someone's 100%?
It doesn't mean they're 100%. And so, my job as an emergency physician is to stabilize someone so that they are well enough to be maintained outside, whether, that is by medicines sometimes we prescribe or by other instructions. For Mr. Wiggins, my instructions were just to continue IV hydration.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about, I think, whether there was acute psychosis, and you found that there was no acute psychosis.
That's correct.
Now, if I understood you correctly, you were saying that has no bearing on other mental illness or illnesses that someone may have. Is that correct?
That's correct. In the emergency room, I can assess if someone is awake, oriented, are they acting crazy, talking crazy, enough that would require them for me to take their rights away. I have them placed in a mental hospital. I don't have the abilities or training to diagnose, the minutia of psychiatric illnesses.
So you're in no way saying that you can make an assessment in the ER whether someone is in fact mentally ill. You're just saying he wasn't showing acute psychosis at that time, correct?
Correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Redirect.
And doctor, we've gone over those medical records. In those medical records, did the patient report that he suffered from any mental health illnesses?
Not that I was aware of.
Thank you.
Recross.
Very brief. It's pretty common for people not to report some of their existing conditions when they're ER? When they're in there?
Certainly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anything further?
Nothing further.
Thank you, doctor. You are released and you may go about your business.
Thank you.
State may call your next witness.
Statement, Brian Hudmore.
Hudnall, if you'll come around, please, I need you to face our clerk, raise your right hand, and be placed under oath.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Have a seat in that chair and speak right into the microphone.
Good morning, Mr. Hudnall.
Good morning.
Will you state your first and last name, please,
Brian Hudnall,
and spell your last name?
Hudnall.
Thank you. And Mr. Hudnall, are you a resident of Dixon County?
I am.
Thank you. And I'll kind of just get right to the point. Are you an acquaintance of the defendant, Stephen Wiggins?
I am.
All right. And do you remember when you first met Mr. Wiggins?
Yeah, I was in a hotel room.
Okay. Do you know what year that was in?
It was all within the same. I've only met him 5 or 6 times. It was within February and March, April, that area.
Of what year?
3 years, 2018.
2018? Okay. So, and before we ask you any more questions about being an acquaintance of the defendant, let me just back up a little bit. You are voluntarily here today, is that correct?
Correct.
Are you currently on any type of community corrections or supervision?
I'm on probation.
You're on probation. And you are a convicted felon, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the jury some of the prior convictions that you
I mean,
have-
my convictions are from my drug use, from just like stolen property, dealing in stolen property, taking stuff, just like property crime, stuff like that, to pay for my addiction.
Okay. In the spring of 2018, in March, April, May, were you on probation at that point in time?
Yes, sir.
And were you arrested for a probation violation on May the 4th of 2018?
Yes, sir.
And were you incarcerated in the Dixon County Jail for some period of time?
Yes, sir. 10 months.
10 months, all right. While you were incarcerated, you were arrested on May 4th, 2018. While you were incarcerated, did you pass forward information that you thought was important about the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How did you do that?
Just on a kiosk.
What do you mean a kiosk?
It's just something to get a hold of the staff in the jail.
All right, so if you're an inmate, you have access to a kiosk in the cell or in the pod
Yes,
that
sir.
you're in,
Yes, sir.
and you can send information to someone inside the jail, an employee of the jail.
Yes, sir.
And is that what you did?
Yes, sir.
Was it information pertaining to the defendant?
It was. When I'd seen that what had happened on the news, the conversation popped in my head immediately. It was from that month.
Okay. And when you say you saw what happened on the news, can you view the news while you're in jail?
Yes, sir.
And you knew that Sergeant Baker had been murdered
Yes, sir. I knew him.
and that the defendant had been arrested?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you sent forth some information.
Yes, sir.
And can you tell us the very specifics of that information?
Yes, sir. He had stopped by my house, and when I walked up to the car, the window was
Let
down.
me interrupt for a second. Let me ask counsel to meet with me for a moment, please. Just bear with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to step across for a moment. Let me make sure one thing, please. All right. Mr. Hudnall, I wanted to make sure that I put an order down regarding some limits on what you can testify to, and the state's going to go over that with you. He said, General Crisis tells me that he's gone over it with you to be in compliance
Yes, sir.
with the order that I put down, and I just want him to ask you those questions outside the presence of the jury so we can avoid any issues.
Okay.
And then you can testify about that. But when you do testify, you're under court order to comply with what you're doing in this situation when the jury returns. You understand all that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Crouch?
Thanks. Okay, Mr. Hudnall, let's again kind of review what we had previously discussed. Do you understand that you're not to mention that you were conducting a drug transaction
Yes,
with
sir.
the defendant
Yes, sir.
in any way? And had I told you that you should testify that it was an acquaintance instead of a drug transaction?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Also, do you understand that you are to not mention that the defendant said he was going back to jail?
Not to mention,
It's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
My question to you in front of the jury will be, what did the defendant say?
So
when
we
you-
can clarify this, excuse me for interrupting. Is there any objection from the defense? I've ruled on this, I understand you object to my ruling, but my suggestion would be to allow the state to lead this witness in the questions that he presents so that we can avoid any potential error.
Yes, Your Honor, without, backing away from our initial objection.
No, you're-
Respecting the court's ruling, yes, we would prefer that the state.
Then I think the simplest way is to allow the state to ask the questions in a leading fashion, allow him to just affirm that that's what he's saying, and then that avoids the issue of dancing around the restrictions I put on what he may say.
Yes, sir.
And I note that the defense is objecting to this line of testimony. They objected in the pretrial hearings. I allowed it because I think it is relevant and goes to the motive of the defendant in this case. All right. Go ahead and then lead him into those
Yes, sir.
questions.
Thank you.
This is a trial run, Mr. Hudnall, so that we can make sure there are no mistakes, okay?
yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Hudnall, in May of 2018, before you went to jail, did you observe a pistol in the lap of the defendant, Stephen Wiggins?
Yes, sir.
And when you observed that pistol, did you tell him you better be careful riding around Dixon with that pistol?
Yes, sir.
And what was his response to you?
If anybody tries to arrest me, I'm going to smoke their ass.
Thank you. That would be my questions.
Sorry about my language.
Then that would be the testimony that he'll offer in front of the jury, and noting the defendant's objection, that will be allowed. So let's go ahead, anything before we bring the jury back then. All right. Is that the extent of your what you intend to elicit from this witness? All right, bring the jury in. All right, we're having a restroom break by all of the jurors, and there's only we have 16 jurors and 2 restrooms, so we're gonna take a minute. Anybody else need a restroom break now? Might be. Let's just go ahead and take our mid-morning recess right now. All right, could I see counsel at the bench for a moment, please?
Recording in progress.
Let's stop the recording for just a second.
Recording stopped.
All right, Miss Pam, you can take this down if you want.
Oh, okay.
Earlier, I was telling the jury about what steps we have not kind of spoke about the sentencing hearing. I'm glad to clarify that with another jury board item we talked about. That only if they found him guilty for whether we want to do a sentencing hearing. Correct, and I said I took this. Either one of you want me to bring it to the jury to clarify if that is a mistake on my part. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
All right, we are ready for the jury then. Pam, can you give me the numbers for the jury for the concerns and instruct the numbers? I think I started that. I don't think those are the correct numbers. I'll give you the correct numbers for them. I appreciate it. The ones that will be on the tabs. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take a minute to clarify the clarification I gave you this morning. This morning when I was trying to give you a clarification of what I said about the next steps, I misspoke and I said something about a sentencing hearing. If you remember all during jury selection, when we talked to you individually and we talked to you as a group, you understand that the defendant is charged with first-degree murder, but he is presumed to be innocent. And only if the jury finds the state has proven his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to those charges would you then go to a sentencing hearing. That was not the step that I was referring to. I was referring to the steps of the state resting their proof, the defense offering any if they choose to, and then us giving an opportunity to hear the closing remarks of the lawyers and my final charge. Those are the steps that I intended to say when I misspoke. So please disregard any reference that I made to the sentencing hearing. We're not even close to that. We're way away, all right? Everybody understand that? Thank you. Let the record reflect they've all acknowledged they understood my clarification of my clarification. Then we are ready for the state to call your next witness.
Thank you, Judge. All right, Mr. Hudnall, you've previously been placed under oath, and we're
Yes,
back. Just to kind of refresh everybody where we were, you were arrested for a violation of probation on May the 4th of 2018,
Yes, sir.
and went to jail, and I think you testified you stayed there how many months?
10 months.
All right, 10 months. Now, before that, before you went to jail on May 4th, you said you had multiple times an acquaintance with the defendant, Mr. Wiggins.
Yes, sir.
And did you observe a defendant or a pistol in the defendant's lap?
Yes, sir.
And did you tell the defendant to be careful driving around Dixon with a pistol in his lap?
Yes, sir.
And what was his response when you told him that?
If anybody tries to arrest me, I'll smoke their ass.
Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Mr. Hopkins, any questions?
Mr. Hudnall, when you observed that pistol and you said you heard this statement from Mr. Wiggins, was anyone else present?
Yes, his girlfriend,
Who was that?
Erica. I never talked to her.
Erica Castro Miles? And was she present
Yes, sir.
at the location, and do you know if she heard that statement?
She was in the passenger seat right beside him.
Okay. Now, you stated a little earlier this morning that as soon as you saw this incident involving the shooting of Sergeant Baker, this statement just immediately popped into your mind.
Yeah.
And so you then immediately contacted law enforcement to let them know about that statement.
Yes.
So immediately means what to you? Like as soon as you thought of it, you contacted them and told them about it?
I really can't tell you. It was 3 years ago.
Okay. Well, did
Could have
you,
been a day. It could have been that week.
so your testimony today is that within a week of you seeing this on television, and you would have seen it on television the same time it happened, correct?
I don't know. They play TVs different times in jail.
Okay.
Like it might get privileged, might not.
Okay.
I just remember seeing it, and then I went and got on the kiosk.
And you ran down to the kiosk and you sent that off?
I ain't run down. It's in the
Well-
pod with you.
Okay. So do you think you saw it within a few days of it happening?
I couldn't tell you.
Did you see it within a few weeks of it happening?
I couldn't tell you.
Did
I
you
don't
see,
remember the exact date.
Did you see it within a few months?
I've seen it within a month, yeah.
Okay. So within a month of it happening, you had contacted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and they were talking to you about this?
Yes.
Okay. You have just a moment, Your Honor. Well, Mr. Hudnall, if, for example, Agent Neese, who's seated here at the table, did a report, and he said that you didn't contact them until November 23rd, would that surprise you?
No, I told you I don't remember.
Okay,
I just assumed it was within a month.
okay. So it could have been 5 months later after you've been sitting in jail when you decided to contact law enforcement.
It could have been.
Okay. And that would have been after you got indicted August of 2018 for the charges you later got community corrections for.
No, I didn't get community corrections for that. I was on community corrections violation.
Okay.
I signed up for drug court. I was already accepted into it before any of this ever happened.
But you did get indicted in August 21st of 2018 for,
Right.
let's see, possessing a firearm, for aggravated burglary,
No.
and count 3.
I only got charged with the, I don't know what they charged me with, but I got convicted of the possession of a firearm.
Okay. Do you remember doing a plea agreement in your case that set out what you were actually pleading guilty to?
I don't recall. I said it's been a couple of years.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
See if you recall this document, Mr. Hudnall. Is that your signature at the bottom of that?
Mm-hmm.
What is that document?
Plea of guilty
By whom?
by me
To what charges?
for aggravated burglary, theft, and possession of a firearm.
So you did plead guilty to aggravated burglary?
I guess, but it wasn't a burglary.
Okay, but you pled guilty to it,
I guess I did.
okay, and that is your signature.
Yes.
And when is that dated?
I don't know. I can't see a date on it.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Scribbled down there at the bottom.
It appears to be January 18th of 2019 there. Do you see that?
All right.
Is that the date that you signed it?
I guess that's my signature.
Take this into evidence, Your Honor.
What's the number?
203.
Number 203.
Take a look at this document. Do you recognize this?
I don't.
Does it appear to be an indictment naming you in those charges that you pled guilty to in January of 2019?
Yeah.
And it charges you with the offenses that we just discussed?
Yeah.
And what was the date that indictment was filed? It's up at the top.
August 21st,
2018?
2018.
Your Honor, I'd move that into evidence if there's no objection.
Marked in Exhibit 204.
So you went to jail May 4th of 2018 on a community corrections violation, is that correct?
Correct.
And you saw this, according to you, on the news within a month or so of it happening. So that would be June of 2018, correct?
Correct.
You did not notify law enforcement in June of 2018 about this statement.
Okay, I was mistaken on the date.
You didn't notify law enforcement July of 2018 about the date, correct?
I don't know the exact date, so I can't tell you.
Do you disagree with, would you disagree if Agent Nee said it was November 23rd of 2019?
No, because I said I didn't remember.
Okay. But you were indicted in August. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
You went to court for that.
Correct.
Had several court appearances for that,
Correct.
all right? And you knew you were facing a lot of time for those charges.
I had already been accepted into a program before I ever done the statement, so I'd already signed up for drug court and been accepted into drug court.
Well, when did you sign up for that?
There again, I don't know the dates, but I was accepted into drug court before I ever said anything about this case.
Which is why when you talked to the law enforcement, you repeatedly asked them, did you not, what are they going to do to help me since I'm giving them this information?
I did ask, yeah, correct.
But why did you need help if you already had everything worked out?
I don't know. I can't tell you.
Redirect.
Mr. Hudnall, you've pled guilty to several cases, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you entered the drug court program.
Yes, sir.
You've acknowledged your guilt down the line.
Yes, sir.
You've accepted the responsibility and the consequences for your actions.
Yes, sir.
Are you still part of the drug court program?
I graduated last year.
You graduated successfully?
Yes, sir.
Have you been in any more trouble?
No, sir.
Is everything you've said here today truthful?
Yes, sir.
Are your statements and memory about what the defendant said, is that truthful?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you, Mr. Hudnall. You may step down. You're released from your subpoena and may go about your business. State may call your next witness.
State called Agent Neese.
Agent Neese, if you'll step forward.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name for the court, please?
Nathan Lee Neese,
And spell-
Nathanneese.
Thank you very much. Agent Neese, you are employed with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation,
That's correct.
and how long have you been employed there?
I've been with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation since February the 16th of 2016.
Thank you. And what is your current position?
My current position is I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Middle Criminal Investigations Division.
And can you give the jury just kind of a background of what that position entails?
So my position currently is I supervise several agents for several counties in the Middle Tennessee District. So from the 23rd Judicial District, which is what we're in at the Kentucky line, all the way down to the Alabama line in the 22nd Judicial District, and then over to the Interstate 65 that runs north and south through the middle of Middle Tennessee, several counties and several agents in that area.
Thank you. And Agent Neese, prior to you being promoted to the Assistant Special Agent in charge, what was your position with TBI?
I was assigned as a Special Agent Criminal Investigator for the Middle Criminal Investigation Division.
And were you assigned to investigate this case against Stephen Wiggins?
I was.
And Agent Neese, a little bit more about your background. Did you have law enforcement experience prior to being hired by the TBI?
I did.
And what was that experience?
So prior to my TBI service, I had 16 years of law enforcement experience with the Lawrence County Sheriff's Department and the Lawrenceburg Police Department. I served in roles such as a deputy sheriff, a school resource officer, criminal investigator, patrol sergeant, patrol lieutenant, and then a lieutenant over the Criminal Investigations Division is the final position I held at the local agency before moving on to TBI.
Okay, thank you. Agent Neese, just kind of a little bit of context on where we are in the case so far. You've been in the courtroom the entire time.
Yes, sir.
We began the case talking about an incident at the Midtown Inn and Suite in Kingston Springs, Tennessee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you give the jury kind of an overview of where Kingston Springs, Tennessee is in relation to Dixon and Dixon County?
Yes, sir. So from here in Charlotte, we would most likely travel to Dixon to get on Interstate 40 and then travel east to Kingston Springs, which is in a neighboring county in Cheatham County. And so to give it in relation to exits, I believe the Dixon exit is exit 172 and the Kingston Springs exit is 188.
Thank you. So Kingston Springs, Tennessee is located, I think you testified, at the 188 exit mile marker
I believe that's correct, yes.
on Interstate 40.
Yes, sir.
And how close is the Midtown Inn and Suite to the on and off ramp of I-40 at the 188 exit?
It's extremely close. As soon as you exit off either way, you would only travel a very short distance to that Midtown Inn and Suites.
Okay. And if you were to get on the interstate at the 188 exit, Kingston Springs, and travel west to the city of Dixon, what would be the most direct route?
The most direct route would be to get, just come directly out of the hotel parking lot, take a right, and then take a right onto the on-ramp to I-40, and then travel to Dixon on I-40 to the exit 172.
Okay. And how many miles is that?
I believe it's approximately 16 miles between those two exits.
Okay. And Cheatham County, Kingston Springs is the adjoining county to Dixon County, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Do you know how far it is from Kingston Springs, the 188 mile marker, to the incident location of Tidwell Switch and Sam Vineyard?
I believe it's approximately 21 miles from the exit to the intersection of Tidwell Switch and Sam Vineyard.
Okay. Now, we've also put on some testimony and proof regarding 3 separate incident or locations in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Actually, 4 if you talk about Kingston Springs, but let's exclude the Midtown Inn and Suite incident and talk specifically about Dixon County.
Okay.
What are the 3 locations we've discussed or the proof is put on?
So we've discussed the scene at Tidwell Switch and Sam Vineyard, and then going in chronological order, we would go to the Bear Creek Valley Road incident scene, and then the arrest location on Stinson Road.
Thank you. Agent, can you identify this map, please?
Yes, this is an aerial view of, a pretty good aerial view of all 3 incident locations.
Okay. And does the photograph that I've handed you reflect it on the screen?
It is.
And let's just talk briefly to put in context, the overlay of where everything is. Let me start at this point right here. What intersection is this?
That's the intersection of Tidwell Switch and Sam Vineyard.
Okay? And let me go to the right of the screen. What is this?
That is the Bear Creek Valley Road incident scene where Unit 500 for Sergeant Baker was located.
And then I'll go to the middle of the screen. What's this?
That is the arrest location of Stephen Wiggins at Stinson Road at Bear Creek.
Now, Agent, in the course of this investigation, did you take note of the mileage or area covered in these 3 locations?
I did.
And can you tell us the distance from the Tidwell Switch, Sam Vineyard, incident site to Bear Creek Valley?
That distance is it's just a little over 3 miles.
A little over 3 miles?
Yes, sir.
And what about from Bear Creek Valley to the location where the defendant was arrested on Stinson Road?
I believe approximately by road, it would be 2 miles.
If you went by road?
If you went by road, yes, sir.
And looking at this map that we have created here, what is the red line demonstrate?
So it's the path from Tidwell Switch to Bear Creek Valley, and then where the Sergeant Baker's body was found.
And generally, was it created using some of the GPS coordinates from Unit 500?
Yes, sir.
All right. And Agent Neese, also, we've heard testimony about a perimeter being set up for the manhunt. Do you know roughly how many square miles the perimeter and manhunt encompass?
I know in this area it was it's approximately 5 miles. So we tried to cover a 5-mile area. There were people spread out everywhere looking and trying to locate the subject who had did this. And so there was a constant flow of traffic of law enforcement from the command posts that were set up at Highway 46, traveling into this area and traveling these roads, just as Trooper Judd testified to regarding getting assignments of traveling roads and covering that area. There were also people in the woods, tracking and doing certain things and following leads that we had received through our virtual command center.
And Agent Neese, did you verify that each of these locations occurred or happened in Dixon County, Tennessee?
Yes, sir, I did.
I'll move the map as the next exhibit, please.
205.
We're going to cover several things in your testimony, but I want to make a few quick identification of some evidence that was collected, okay?
Okay.
Let's talk first about the Tidwell Switch and Sam Binyard Road. That
Yes,
was
sir.
the location of the Saturn vehicle, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you remember how many shell casings, and when I say shell casings, I mean fired shell casings, were recovered from that site?
From that site on the roadway, we had 4 shell casings that were recovered.
Okay. And from inside the car?
And from inside the car, once it was processed at the lab, there were 3 fired cartridge casing or shell casings found inside the vehicle.
And just to distinguish, we heard some testimony yesterday from the lab that of a 4th casing from within the car, but had that shell, the 4th one, been fired?
That's correct. It was found in the glove box, and it was an unfired cartridge case.
Thank you. I also want to talk a little bit more about the Saturn, the vehicle that we've heard so much discussion about.
Yes, sir.
Did you actually do a test on the vehicle to determine the working condition of the driver's side door?
I did.
And was that test recorded?
It was.
And who did the recording?
I video recorded it.
All right. And I'm going to ask that a copy of that recording be brought up on the screen.
Today's date is June the 7th, 2018. Time on hand is 3:20 p.m. The Special Agent Nathan Neese, Special Agent Brant Holt with mid-CID showing operation and functionality of the driver's door of a 90s model Saturn 4-door belonging to Erica Ann Castro Miles.
Door will not open. Manual unlock. Door opens. Back passenger door. Door is locked. Door lock is broken. The lock position and the unlock position door will not open. Back passenger door is unlocked and opens. Front passenger door is unlocked, is open. Hitting the lock button. Lock button. Closes the rear passenger door. Lock. Unlocking from the interior, opening from the interior. Door is locked. Interior will not open. Door is unlocked from the interior. Passenger door opens.
Time on hand is approximately 3:23 p.m. Begin the video.
Move a copy of the videos to the next exhibit, please.
All right.
Exhibit 206.
Agent Neese, was the driver's side front door in proper working condition?
It was.
Were the locks on the driver's side front door in proper working condition?
They were.
Did we observe Agent Holt operating the door from the inside and the outside and the locks, and they all worked properly?
We did.
If it were put forth that the front door was not working properly, would that be the truth or a lie?
That's a lie.
Thank you. Let's go next briefly to the Bear Creek Valley, where the Ford Interceptor, the Sergeant Baker's vehicle, Unit 500, was recovered.
Yes, sir.
Do you know in your investigation the approximate value of a police vehicle with the equipment and the basic package put together?
You're probably looking at approximately $41,000 for that vehicle.
And of course, when you have that value, that's talking about the vehicle and the police emergency lights, sirens, radio equipment added in.
That's correct.
All right. And also recovered from underneath the hood of Unit 500 was the Glock 9mm with a light attached. What's the approximate value of that weapon?
Probably looking for the gun and the light from a department. It's probably around $600.
Okay. Thank you. Agent Neese, as the lead on this case, did you take possession of the body camera video that was worn by Sergeant Baker on May 2018?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did you provide a copy of that to our office to bring to this trial?
Yes, sir, I did.
Your Honor, at this time, we're going to play the body cam video. It does have graphic.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've indicated to you before, sometimes during this trial, you're going to necessarily have to see evidence that may be somewhat upsetting or disturbing. This is actual body cam footage, and for that reason, want to just prepare yourself for that. So.
Judge, and we need to approach just briefly for that. Off the record.
boy Robert Young, 013. Stand ready. Hang on. What's that, your driver's license number?
No,
Oh, wait a minute. Go ahead. Go ahead. Here's the one. I can copy. I'm at the corner of Sam Vineyard and Tidmouth Suite. Get out of the car. Keep your hands up here right there and get out of the damn car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Unlock the damn door. Unlock the door right now. Open it. Open it.
I'm trying. Come on, I gotta get to your face.
Open the door.
Look, I gotta sleep.
Open the door.
Come on, I gotta sleep right here.
Chris, where you at?
I'm trying, bro.
Get it.
I'm trying to do this fucked up.
Open the door.
It's a fucked up door, okay? I'm trying.
You keep your hands right there.
What's wrong, sir? What's wrong?
I'll explain to you in a minute. Get out of the car. Get out of the car.
I'm trying. Look, I'm not going.
Keep your hands up in the air so I can see them.
It takes a clarifier to know something to do this.
Where's your car?
Right here.
Get them.
Okay?
Get them. Get them. You're fine. You're good.
Calm down.
You're good. Come on. Alright, look, this is what we're gonna do. Was that door on the passenger side open?
Yeah.
Alright. You put your hand up there on the steering wheel.
Just a little.
You're fine. Alright. Can you climb out the passenger side?
I can.
Can you climb out the passenger side?
Hold on.
Stay right there. You just put your hands on the steering wheel. Stay right there. Don't get out of here.
Agent Ace, and we're going to play bits and pieces of this, but coming up, are you able to hear a phone ringing?
Yes,
Do you have to listen carefully for it?
very carefully.
And what ringtone do you believe is audible?
I believe it's a duck call. Sounds like a duck.
And about what time does that happen?
I think it's around 16-minute mark, somewhere around in there.
And for the record, we have it paused at 15 minutes and 50 seconds, so we should start listening for the duck call.
Yes, sir.
All right.
It's now.
Agent Ace, did you hear that quack quack?
I did.
That's what I thought I heard, but what did you hear?
I heard this duck call.
Okay. And after the ringtone, after reviewing the body cam, can you hear the defendant talking on the phone, or what appears to be him talking on the phone?
You can.
At about what time?
It's shortly after the phone ring, maybe the 16:28 mark, somewhere around in there,
Okay.
I believe.
Go ahead. Agent Eats, it's kind of hard to hear with the muffled background and the vehicle on the road conditions in the field. But,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to now move forward to 24 minutes and 14 seconds. And do you know what can be heard by the defendant at this point? And if not, that's okay. We'll play it.
I don't remember exactly at this mark,
That's
but
fine.
I know there's still communication.
Go back 5 seconds. That's fine. Go ahead.
You want to talk to you? Like, just do right now.
Agent Neese, did you hear that interchange with dispatch?
I did.
What was said?
Mr. Wiggins said on the radio he had one in custody, and then dispatch responded with acknowledging that they had received his transmission of one in custody.
Did he say one in custody, white male?
Yes, he
And that
did.
and that was the defendant responding to dispatch.
That's correct.
Okay. So, it's the body camera is lengthy. Are we able to, in viewing it all, is there a lot of down screen like this or black screen?
It's a lot like this for several minutes.
Later on, can we see more?
Yes, sir.
What happens later on in the body cam?
You'll start seeing Sergeant Baker's body move. So at that point, he's being manipulated and he's moving around in the back seat.
And at some point, did the investigation establish that there was Sergeant Baker was set on fire, the vehicle was set on fire?
That's correct. You'll see in the body cam after the black screen and the camera gets moved where there's enough light, ambient light to shine in to see, and you can start to see the flames and the reflection of Sergeant Baker's arm.
And if I could move us to 34 minutes and 40 seconds. And Agent East, can you describe what we just witnessed?
We just witnessed Sergeant Baker's body moving around, being manipulated. Then you seen another person's arm come in with some tattoos on it.
Okay. And is Sergeant Baker's body still in the rear seat of the Unit 500 at this point?
It is.
Okay. If you'd move us to 40 minutes, please.
Stay on scene here as well. I'll be around maybe central to relay the timeline. Roger. Lastly, here, all of your traffic sitting out in the trailer down.
So what we're seeing is you can see Sergeant Baker's arm, and you can see the reflection of the flames and hear the audible crackling of the fire and the audible noises that the fire is making as it's trying to continue to burn.
I don't want to have to replay a lot of this, but I do want to ask you some questions from the beginning. So if you could turn the lights back on, please. In listening to the full body camera, when asked for identification, what did the defendant give to Sergeant Baker?
He give a social security number that does not belong to him, but does belong to a real person.
Okay. So it was a real social security number to a human being in the state of Tennessee,
That's correct.
but it did not belong to the defendant.
That's correct.
When Sergeant Baker initially approaches the vehicle, do you remember what occurs on his initial approach?
As soon as he's walking up, you can hear Sergeant Baker to tell someone to stay in the car, to just stay in the car.
Okay. Then what happens?
He makes contact and asks him, what are you doing out here? Why are you here? What's the problem?
Okay. At some point, did Sergeant Baker go to the rear of the vehicle and do a license plate check?
He did.
And is there a name for that when you call it in to dispatch to run a check?
The 10 codes that I'm used to, that I know as a law enforcement officer, you can run a 1028, which is a registration check. Then you might run what we call a 1029, which is a warrants or stolen check for that same license plate number.
Okay. At this point in time, you observed Sergeant Baker move to the rear of the car and call in Boy Robert Young 013.
Yes, I did.
Was that the license plate number on the vehicle?
It is.
At that point in time, had Sergeant Baker removed his weapon from his holster?
He had not.
Okay. At some point, does Sergeant Baker remove his weapon?
He does.
And after reviewing the video, do you know why he did that?
So when he was informed, the first transmission you can hear that dispatch responds to him when dispatch asks him if he's 1012. To me, that means, are you near a person that can hear the radio traffic that you're about to receive? They do that for a number of reasons, and if the person's wanted or if it's a stolen vehicle, they know that the situation that the officer's in is about to change, because it's a more serious situation, because we have a felony issue that's happened. A stolen vehicle is the amount of the vehicle makes it a felony, and so then you would go into what we would call a felony stop or a felony encounter with the subject in the car.
And is that police procedure to do so?
It is.
And is that what Sergeant Baker did?
He did. Didn't immediately, but he did move around back to the driver's door, and that's when he drew his sidearm from his holster and ordered the subject out of the vehicle.
When he ordered the defendant to get out of the vehicle, what did the defendant do or say?
He said the door was messed up. He was trying to get out and just kept referring to the fact that he had to use pliers to open the door, and that he couldn't get out of the car door.
Okay. What does...
You want it on the record? Investigating officer will allow him to give detail on, obviously, his interpretation. I was struck with jury. This is his interpretation that he gave to the jury, and they will conclude. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, so that you may understand, you have observed this video. The state is asking Agent Neese his interpretation of those facts and what he observed and what his belief is of what occurred. I'm allowing that to help give clarification to you, but you are the finders of fact in this case. You will, having watched that video, you will make your own conclusions and draw your own set of facts as to what you observed and what you heard and what you saw. So while I'm allowing the state to ask Agent Neese his clarification questions about what he's observed, keep in mind that that is simply not, you're not bound by that. That is given to you only for the help of clarification about these issues, but you are the finders of fact and you will make your own your own findings. All right, thank you. With that, state may continue.
Again, Agent Neese, watching the video, you've already testified that you observed Sergeant Baker remove his duty weapon from his holster,
That's correct.
engaging in a felony stop.
Yes, sir.
And what did the defendant say when he was told to get out of the car?
That the door was messed up, that he couldn't get out.
Okay. What happened then?
So there's some more interaction between Sergeant Baker and Mr. Wiggins, again telling him to get out of the car, and you could tell that Sergeant Baker's intensity has come up because it now is a felony encounter. But then you also see shortly thereafter that Sergeant Baker's de-escalation comes in, tells Mr. Wiggins, it's okay, where's your pliers at? Ask him where the pliers at. So he starts to ask him the questions about opening the door. And then he interacts with him about, okay, if the door won't open, how about the passenger side? Can you get out the passenger side?
Does Sergeant Baker reholster his weapon?
He does.
So he has his weapon drawn initially and then reholsters it.
He does.
Does he reholster his weapon before walking around the car?
He does. He's still on the driver's side of the car as he's walking to the rear driver's quarter panel and holsters his weapon at that time as he's walking around the back of the vehicle.
What happens as Sergeant Baker approaches the passenger side?
As soon as he gets up to the driver's window, he says, I think he does say, get out of the car, and then immediately shots are fired.
Describe Sergeant Baker's actions after he's initially shot.
So Sergeant Baker retreats. He has encountered a threat. He has talked about, he stated on the body cam, shots fired, officer down, just before he collapses.
What happens after he collapses?
You can hear some labored breathing as he's laying on the ground, and with the way the body cameras are worn, they're worn on the front of the body, so Sergeant Baker would have been laying on his back and the camera's pointing to the sky, and then you hear subsequently 2 more shots, and then just a few minutes later 3 final shots.
Okay. Do you see the defendant in this body camera after Sergeant Baker is on the ground?
You do.
And what did you observe in the body camera after Sergeant Baker was on the ground?
The defendant comes over and stands over him and he does something manipulating with Sergeant Baker's body, or Sergeant Baker as he's laying on the ground. He's doing something, whether with the body, that makes him move a little bit, and then he walks away from him or runs away from him.
Okay. At any point in the body camera after Sergeant Baker is on the ground, do you see the defendant holding a weapon?
Yes.
What do you see?
So you see, if you are able to slow this video down and to look at it as I have many times, you can see that the defendant has a handgun, what I would describe as a semi-automatic handgun that is in the lockback position.
And describe for us what the lockback position is.
So lockback is when it can occur in some different ways, but lockback can occur if I take my magazine out of my firearm and then I run the slide to eject the round in the chamber, and then I can physically lock it back at that point, or if I've pulled the trigger until there's no more ammunition in the firearm, it will lock back automatically.
Okay. Agent Neese, I want to provide you with what has been previously marked as Exhibit 142. Can you identify that photograph?
I can.
What is that?
This is the High Point 45 that was recovered in Stephen Wiggins' backpack. It has a magazine with 8 rounds that have been removed from the magazine, and then 1 round that was removed from the chamber. And it's normal practice for agents to put it in this condition, one, to render it safe, so that they can package it for testing or storage, and then it separates the round that was in the chamber to demonstrate that the firearm was loaded at the time it was recovered.
Is that weapon in that photograph, Exhibit 142, in what you say is a lockback position?
It is in a lockback position, yes, sir.
Okay. And if you could return that to the clerk, that would be great. And I would ask Mr. Etheridge to bring us up to 6 minutes and 55 seconds on the body cam, and just a still photo from the body cam. Agent, what do you see here?
The glare is difficult, but you can see what looks to be a firearm in the lockback position. You can see the bottom portion of the frame and then the barrel, because when a slide locks back, the barrel is exposed.
Okay. Agent East, can you identify this photograph?
I can.
And what is that?
That is a still photo from the body camera.
Okay. Similar to what we see on the screen now, or exactly, is that a still shot?
Yes, sir.
And what can you identify in that photograph?
You can again see the outline of the frame and the lockback position of the firearm.
Okay. Move that as the next exhibit, please.
207.
And, Your Honor, I'll need a jury out at this point.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you will step out, I need to address the matter. Just wait just a moment. We want to make sure they're in the jury room before we start talking, just to avoid any issues. So. All right, that should be sufficient. Mr. Crouch? Stay in the room.
Judge, the state has prepared a piece of demonstrative evidence that we'd like the jury to see. It's a comparison of the Exhibit 142 with the still shot that was just moved as the last exhibit. We've prepared an overlay on a video clip, and I'd like to show it to defense and Your Honor so we can have any objections on the record.
All right, well, let's see what we've got.
And before you start, Agent East, can you identify what's on the screen for the record here?
Yes, that's a still shot from the body camera, and you again see the firearm at lockback and the frame at the bottom and the barrel exposed.
And this is just a still shot from the body camera video that we just watched.
Yes, sir.
All right. And Agent Neese, describe what we see now.
Now you see the high point 45 that was recovered from the backpack. It's just the photograph that is on the brown paper bag that was taken after it was recovered in the backpack.
Okay. And if you would, please walk over towards the TV screen and show the comparison between Exhibit 142, the photograph of the high point 45, to what's on the body cam still photo.
see this is the slide, this is the barrel, and this is the bottom plastic frame. And as you see, you have the slide, the barrel exposed, and this same angle in the frame of that weapon at the bottom.
Thank you. Judge, those would be our questions.
Your Honor, we object to the demonstrative. I mean, I think the picture has to speak to it for itself. Quite frankly, the picture is not clear enough. I think to really be putting up another firearm for some kind of comparison. And it's a very dark photograph. I think the jury can look at the photograph. I think the demonstrative is prejudicial. And I don't think it aids the jury. And they can look at it and make that determination for themselves. But that picture is not clear enough for there to be any defining features between that 45 and any other, semi-automatic firearm that's dark in color. So we would object.
For the record, this witness has already testified that, in his opinion, that's what he observed from the photograph that's been marked as an exhibit. The court will allow this demonstrative piece of evidence to justify or to show why the agent believes that shows what he says it shows. The jury will begin to be instructed that they are to draw their own conclusions. This will be admitted only to show that the witness is testifying. That's why he believes it to be that situation. All right, we're ready for the jury. I'm going to instruct the jury when they return on that issue. James, I see you for a second.
Judge?
She will text you, not you. I'm sorry, General Crouch. Go ahead, General Crouch.
Just while the jury's out, Judge, we've agreed to all the redactions. It's been prepared. The final version is being printed as we speak. I'm not ready for it yet. I'm just letting you know that before I get into the recorded interview.
Well, it's 10 to 12. It may be a good point when we get it finished with this section of Agent East's testimony before we go to that statement and play it and have them go through that. We'll take some time to do that, so we'll just break for lunch at that point. So. We are. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is a demonstration. We call it demonstrative evidence. It is not anything other than something that the state wants to introduce to help you understand something. Keep in mind, you are the deciders of the facts in this case. You are the ones who will make your own determination. This witness has testified about a certain issue, about in a certain section of the video that he believed he saw a gun in a certain condition or position, and a copy of that photograph of a still from that has already been introduced. This next step is something that I'm allowing solely for the purpose of explaining why this witness came to that conclusion. And you will again be the ones who will decide whether this is helpful or not helpful, and whether it does in fact constitute what this agent says. With that admonition, then Joan, you may proceed.
Agent, you've already testified that you observed a weapon in the defendant's hands standing over the body of Sergeant Baker. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you identified a timestamp in the actual body cam video where you observed this?
Yes, sir, there is a timestamp for it.
Is that 6 minutes and 55 seconds?
I believe that's correct.
And if I could have Mr. Etheridge bring us to 6 minutes and 55 seconds. All right. This is a still photo. Is that correct, Agent?
That's correct.
Of the 6 minute, 55 second mark of the video?
Yes, sir.
All right. And what do you observe in this still photo?
In this still photo, you can see the
Why don't you go around to the screen, please?
Of course, you can see Mr. Wiggins' face, hand, and then here is the firearm. The slide is locked back, the barrel is exposed, and this is the bottom portion of the frame of the weapon.
Okay, thank you. And Agent Neese, did you compare this still shot of the body cam to Exhibit 142, which we just discussed, which is the 45 in lockback position?
Yes, sir, I did.
And are they similar?
They are similar.
And did you make an overlay of this still photo with Exhibit 142?
Yes, sir.
And you show that, Mr. Etheridge?
You can just see this is the high point 45 that was recovered out of the backpack. The photograph that was previously entered, you can see the slide, you see the barrel exposed, and you see the bottom portion of the frame with this angle here, similar to the photograph.
Thank you. And the image that came onto the screen, that's actually from Exhibit 142, which we just discussed.
I believe that's correct.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'll provide for demonstrative Exhibit 1 as the
All
next
right.
exhibit.
It would be marked as Exhibit 208.
Yes, sir.
May we approach for that center?
You will not be allowed to go to the jury. May mark it as demonstrative.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Agent Neese, as Sergeant Baker was on the ground, did you observe and hear him breathing?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear additional shots as he was breathing
Yes, I did.
and as he was laying on the ground?
Yes, sir.
We were able to hear some of the radio transmissions from Unit 500, but I now want to ask you to identify the voices that we've heard in Exhibit 12, which is Call 20 from dispatch, okay?
Yes, sir.
If you could bring that up, Mr. Evans.
Call 20 on Wednesday, May 30th, 2018, at 6:50 a.m. with a GMT offset of negative 300 minutes. Agent ID is extension is 115.
Daniel, you good? I got you. You want me to hang tight here?
It is showing confirmed, Kingston Springs.
Start that. In custody, 1 male, on the way to Dixie Central.
Agent Neese, that last voice we heard, do you recognize that voice?
I do.
And whose voice is that?
The defendant, Stephen Wiggins,
And what is he saying? Or what did he say?
he said, "Roger that, one in custody en route to Dixon Central."
And that was in response to some radio traffic?
Yes, the dispatch had confirmed. When they say confirmed out of Kingston Springs, it meant that they had confirmed that the vehicle was stolen out of Kingston Springs.
Thank you. Agent Neese, were you? Oh, let me back up. You were present when the defendant was arrested, is that correct?
I was at the command post at the hospital when he was brought to that area by THP. Yes, sir.
Before I go any further, I'm going to move a copy of the body cam as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 209.
How quickly after his arrest did you put eyes on him or see him, observe him?
I mean, it would only been as long as it took the troopers to drive him from Stinson Road to the command post at the hospital, which was not a far distance, maybe 4 miles maybe, till they got there. And then I immediately saw him in the parking lot.
What was the condition of his clothing and backpack?
It was wet. He was wet. His clothes were wet. The backpack was wet.
Okay, thank you. And did you, on June 1st, 2018, did you interview the defendant?
I did.
Did this interview occur before or after he was medically cleared by the hospital?
This interview occurred several hours after when he was at the hospital. From his admit time to the time that the interview occurred, it was several hours.
And did you Mirandize the defendant?
I did.
And what is Miranda warning?
So Miranda warning comes from a case of Miranda versus Arizona. It just is basically what you see people say on TV. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one will be appointed for you. You have the right to have an attorney present during questioning. We normally have a form or a card we read from, and so that we get it all out, and we ask if they're willing to make a statement at this time and with those rights in mind.
Was this interview recorded?
It was.
Audio and video?
Audio and video, yes, sir.
Do you know the approximate length of the recording?
A couple hours or longer.
And I ask that because it's noon, and
Yes,
I'm
sir.
about to play the recording. Your Honor.
I think this would be an appropriate time for us to take our lunch break. So rather than start into a recording and stop it, we're going to go ahead and go to lunch and then come back and we'll play that recording. Ladies and gentlemen, remind you again that my admonition every time you break and every time you leave is please do not discuss this case among yourselves or allow anyone to do so. And hopefully you'll have a good lunch and we'll see you back after lunch. 1 o'clock, or is that enough time, or 1:15?
The food is not here yet.
Food's not here yet, so let's try for 1:15 just to make sure you have enough time. All right? Thank you. Sheriff, can I see you for a moment before you leave, please? We'll do this back here, but we'll stand in recess for lunch.
All right.
Recording stopped.